Tonight,
I promise you, our best days are yet to come.
after a blow in her home state, Nikki Haley pledges to stay in the race. The latest from the 2024 campaign trail. Plus, censorship and social media. The case before the Supreme Court that could change the future of what you post online. And
in spite of the destruction that is taking place, I believe God has a purpose.
how the Spirit of God is moving in war-torn Gaza. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Donald Trump racks up more delegates as the campaigns look ahead to Super Tuesday. Good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. Another early state sweep for former President Trump this weekend in South Carolina, and a significant setback for Nikki Haley in her home state. Still, she is vowing to fight on. Washington correspondent Caitlin Burke begins our coverage tonight with the latest on the 2024 race for the White House. Caitlin?
Jenna, Nikki Haley is definitely facing an uphill battle beginning tomorrow with the Michigan primary, followed by more than 20 other states set to vote in the next 10 days. Haley maintains she's not going anywhere.
I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president.
Haley's campaign insists Saturday's loss in her home state didn't surprise them. And despite polling that shows her down in Michigan as well, the former governor insists voters deserve an alternative to both frontrunners.
70% of Americans have said they don't want Donald Trump or Joe Biden in this next election. The majority of Americans dislike Donald Trump. The majority of Americans dislike Joe Biden. 60% of Americans think Donald Trump and Joe Biden are too old to be running for president.
A Quinnipiac poll shows that in a hypothetical general election matchup between Biden and Haley, she has a slight 46 to 43% lead. The same poll shows President Biden leading Donald Trump 49 to 45% hypothetically. Still, for the GOP, Trump is close to locking up the nomination. And after his South Carolina win, Haley's campaign lost the backing of billionaire Charles Koch's organization. Her team released a statement that they don't believe an outside group will make a difference in her path to victory, and her campaign reports raising over $1 million in the last 24 hours on the grassroots level.
We can't afford 4 more years of Biden's failures or Trump's lack of focus.
On the other side, there's talk President Biden could take a hit Tuesday in Michigan, specifically from the state's Muslim and Arab American community. Activists claim, due to Biden's support of Israel in the war with Hamas, that many of those voters are considering an uncommitted vote as a warning to the president.
Any pain and the anger in Dearborn and in parts of Michigan and with the Arab American and Muslim American community is real, and it's raw. And I don't think we're going to win back that trust until we have a change in policy.
Meanwhile, a changing of the guard is underway at the RNC. Republican National Committee Chair Ronna McDaniel will step down March 8th, as will co-chair Drew McKissick. Jenna?
All right, Caitlin, thank you. Well, as Donald Trump moves closer to locking in the GOP nomination, talk about who will be his running mate is growing louder. CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody has more on that.
As Donald Trump cruises towards the Republican National Convention, the talk is drifting quickly to who he may choose to stand beside him as the vice presidential candidate. Hogan Gidley is a former Trump White House official.
In this cycle, I do think the VP pick is going to matter more than it has in the past.
That's because it could determine the future for the party. If Donald Trump wins, he can only serve one term. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's advanced age could lead to a President Kamala Harris if he has to step down in a second term. That means an upcoming VP debate signifies a real glimpse into the future.
So what you're going to see is not just necessarily a vice presidential debate, but kind of a presidential 2.0 debate, if you will. Where is the party going to go from our side and from their side? And the differences could not be more stark.
There are quite a few people considered to be on Trump's shortlist for VP. He mentioned some earlier this month during a Fox News town hall. That list included former presidential candidates Vivek Ramaswamy, Tim Scott, and Ron DeSantis, Governor Kristi Noem, Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, and even former Democrat Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard. Others considered to be on the short list: House Republican Elise Stefanik of New York, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, and Dr. Ben Carson. At last weekend's CPAC conference, the MAGA-dominated crowd had their say, with both Vivek Ramaswamy and Kristi Noem tied for their top VP pick.
We talked to Republican strategist Dave Carney about the process. What's your kind of feeling from a political operative standpoint here?
I think what President Trump wants is a no-drama candidate who's articulate, go out and advocate for his points of view, not try to one-up him or be a show-off, if you know what I mean, but just someone who can do the grinding that the vice president needs to do.
The candidate will also have to be one who Trump's MAGA faithful will see as loyal. They vilified former Vice President Mike Pence when he certified the disputed 2020 election. This week, VP hopeful Senator Tim Scott wouldn't say what he would have done in that situation.
You're asking a hypothetical question that you know can never happen again.
Meanwhile, VP hopeful Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio struck a completely different tune.
Would you have certified the election results had you been vice president?
If I had been vice president, I would have told the states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, and so many others that we needed to have multiple slates of electors, and I think the U.S. Congress should have fought over it from there.
Another big factor would entail finding a candidate able to reach female voters in the suburbs. That's where Democrats are hoping to have a big advantage, especially on the issue of abortion. GOP officials acknowledge they haven't done an effective job of getting their pro-life message across. A Trump VP pick will likely get that job.
You got to be comfortable talking about that issue. You don't want to be skittish of it, because being on the offense on this issue, we win.
While a strong voice on that crucial issue would seem to be important with Trump, it's hard to predict which direction he'll go. However, one overarching point is crucial.
It does matter if you make the wrong choice. You really want to make a good choice. There's not a perfect choice. You don't want to make a bad choice.
And in a GOP election season that seems like a runaway at this point, we could get that VP choice sooner rather than later. David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
All right, thank you, David. Nathan Gonzalez is the editor and publisher of Inside Elections and a Faith Nation contributor, and he joins us now in studio. Nathan, great to have you with us.
Good to see you in person.
In person. So let's start with South Carolina. Alyssa Farah Griffin, she's a co-host of The View, also worked in the Trump White House. She says this is a five-alarm fire, the South Carolina results for the GOP. She says Trump really should have done better given his essential incumbency and also that he has most of the Republican apparatus behind him. What did you make of Saturday's results in South Carolina?
Well, that's one way of looking at it, but also this was Nikki Haley's home state, right? Trump has passed maybe two of his biggest hurdles: New Hampshire, where the electorate was a little more moderate because independents could vote, and then Nikki Haley, the home state of his chief rival right now, and he won by 20 points. And so, and all of this talk about will these voters, Republicans, not vote for him in November? I think it's a little bit overblown. When you go back and look, more than 90% of the people who say they're a Democrat or say they're a Republican vote for the Democratic nominee or the Republican nominee, and I think that'll be the case again in November.
Yeah, to your point, a lot of people, a lot of voters do not want either Joe Biden or Donald Trump, and they're making that clear in poll after poll, really. And just a lot of people that you talk to, too, they'll say they don't like either candidate, and yet that's looking like who will have. Do you think voter turnout could be suppressed for that reason, or could it be people turn out not to necessarily vote for their candidate, but the candidate that the other guy who they really don't want in office?
Right. Negative partisanship or voting against someone can be more powerful than voting for someone. But I guess to those people who are out there and they say, I don't like the idea of the same two old white guys running against each other again, that's not the only race that's on the ballot this November. The Senate majority is on the line, and 33 states are electing a senator. All 435 House districts are on the ballot, and the House majority is just, Democrats need just 4 seats to get the House majority. That's not even talking about governors, state legislatures, city council, mayors. There are lots of other races in this election that impact people's lives more than just not just the presidential race.
Yeah, the Koch brothers, they pulled their money from Nikki Haley, and they're now saying that they're going to be supporting a lot of these Senate races and House races and the more local races, to your point.
Because not only do those officials make laws, current laws, but that's also the farm team for future offices. The House is usually the farm team for Senate races. The Senate can be a farm team for future presidential candidates. So that's the opportunity to start to choose the person that you want representing you or making laws, because then that person could rise up the political ladder.
Right, right. Tomorrow, Michigan primary, we're all watching for that. What are you looking for in Michigan?
Well, I think Biden's going to win, and Trump is going to do well. It's a little more complicated on the Republican side because there's the primary on Tuesday, which 15 of the delegates are going to be assigned there. But then there's a convention, maybe two conventions on Saturday, because Republicans in Michigan can't even decide or agree on who the chair of the Republican Party of Michigan is. So it's a little bit of a mess. When you boil it down, I think Trump is going to still be the front runner and have more delegates.
Yeah, I think it was in 2020. I think Biden won Michigan by 150,000 votes. But now a lot of this Arab population, Muslim population, is saying we're not going to vote for you. We refuse because of the situation in Gaza. Could that really come to bear and affect the way Michigan goes?
Well, I think in the primary, it may not. I don't think it's going to prevent him from winning Michigan in the primary. But if some of those voters don't vote in the general election or withhold their support from Biden, then that could matter. Michigan is one of the presidential battlegrounds. It was one of the closest states in 2020, and Biden can't afford to have any slippage among Democratic voters who usually vote Democratic.
Yeah, I think in 2016 Trump only won it by 10,000 or something like that. So it's close.
It is as close to the center of the battlefield as it gets.
Yeah. All right, Nathan, always good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right, the Supreme Court takes up free speech on social media, the case that could reshape the internet, when Faith Nation returns. Well, social media companies and censorship were the topic of the Supreme Court arguments today. The justices are considering two cases that could fundamentally change free speech on popular platforms. One, coming from Texas, challenges a law banning social media companies from removing political content, even if that content contains hate speech. The other, from Florida, looks at law making it illegal for platforms to ban current political candidates from social media. Today's Florida Solicitor General argued that such sites gained popularity as bastions of free speech, but that the tides have changed.
They now say that they are in fact editors of their user speech, rather like a newspaper. They contend that they possess a broad First Amendment right to censor anything they host on their sites, even when doing so contradicts their own representations to consumers. But the design of the First Amendment is to prevent the suppression of speech, not to enable it.
And here to dive a little deeper into today's arguments, Daniel Cochran, Senior Research Associate in the Tech Policy Center at the Heritage Foundation. Daniel, welcome. So what were your big takeaways from today's oral arguments? And in your opinion, did the justices' questions at all show where they might land?
Well, great to be with you. It was really interesting to see where the oral arguments went, because it seemed that the justices were skeptical of the arguments brought by the tech industry that both laws are unconstitutional in their entirety. It's important to note that the tech industry is arguing that not just part of the law in Texas and Florida, but all of the laws, both of the laws, cannot be applied in any manner that is constitutional. But Justices Gorsuch and Thomas in particular, and Justices Barrett, were asking questions about what if an email provider decided that it didn't want to send emails because of someone's political views, or what if an e-commerce platform decided that they didn't want to provide equal access based on the viewpoints of their users. So it seemed that the Supreme Court didn't quite buy the arguments from the tech platforms that they are editors, because if they're editors, if they have the freedom to censor speech at will, then they should also have the same liability. And Justice Gorsuch, I think, pointed out quite aptly that they can't have their cake and eat it too. Under Section 230, the companies are treated as conduits for user speech. But here in front of the court, the tech companies are claiming that when they decide to take your posts or content down, it's really their free speech and they have a right to do it. So the justices seemed a little bit incredulous about that.
Explain a little bit, Daniel, the ramifications of the ruling one way or the other.
So if the Supreme Court were to buy NetChoice's arguments, it would mean not only that the Texas and Florida laws wouldn't apply. So that would mean that the social media sites like Facebook, for instance, could continue to take down content that they disagree with. But it might have further implications as well, because the arguments made by the tech companies is that merely hosting speech and deciding what can go on their platform is their First Amendment right. So if that's true, then a server that hosts a website, or even potentially a service that provides emails, for instance, and this was one of Justice Alito's questions, they could decide not to serve people because of their political or religious views. So it's really a radical argument that the tech platforms are making. And if the court were to buy that fully, then essentially that could foreclose important protections for American speech. If they uphold the laws, which I'm hoping they do, then it means that states would have more tools available to deal with big tech censorship, including on social media, but potentially in other areas too.
To take action against these companies?
Yes, these companies and others. Again, because the logic that the social media companies are arguing for would say, if we host speech, then it's our right to decide what's on our platform and what's not. But that's not true for any other kind of common carrier. When you call your friend or text your friend, your cell phone provider can't make a decision to not transfer your call or not send your text message if they don't like the content of that message. And Texas's law in particular, all it requires is that these companies offer their services on a viewpoint neutral basis.
All right, Daniel Cochran with the Heritage Foundation. We're out of time for this evening. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll have you back again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as Israel's assault on Hamas takes a humanitarian toll in Gaza, a look at how the Spirit of God is moving among the suffering. The latest from the Middle East, just 2 minutes away. Welcome back. Israel's military is looking for a way to evacuate Palestinian civilians in Rafah. It comes ahead of a planned assault on the Hamas territories holding out in the southern Gaza City. Meanwhile, the U.S. says an outline is in place to secure a new deal to free those kidnapped in Israel on October 7th. The plan reportedly includes releasing around 40 Israelis in exchange for a 6-week pause in fighting and freeing hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. On CBS's Face the Nation, Netanyahu says a ceasefire won't take place until Hamas gives up some of their demands and what he calls delusional claims.
Just crazy demands, and you know, it's too soon to say if they've abandoned them, but if they come down to a reasonable situation, then yes, we'll have a hostage.
And as ceasefire negotiations continue, a shakeup today in governing Gaza. The Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority announced the resignation of his government. The U.S. has hopes the PA will lead Gaza once the Israel-Hamas war comes to an end, an unpopular idea among Palestinians and the Israeli Prime Minister. Well, amid the war and destruction, a movement of God is making its way across Gaza. Some Palestinians say dreams and visions have given them a glimpse of Jesus. Gary Lane reports.
Amid tragedy and suffering, God is intervening in war-torn Gaza.
About 200 Gazans gave their heart to Jesus in one lump sum because the Lord appeared to them in visions and dreams. And they were hugging each other and you know, rejoicing, and realized that all of them had the same vision that each one of them had.
Taysir Sada is a former PLO sniper and aide to Yasser Arafat. About 30 years ago, he came to faith in Jesus Christ and told his story in the book, Once an Arafat Man. Today, he leads the Christian humanitarian Seeds of Hope Foundation.
Despite of the destruction that is taking place, I believe God have a purpose to get the Palestinians in Gaza wake up and look at a different alternative to what they believe.
Let's look forward to the day after Israel's war against Hamas. Explain what you see happening spiritually in Gaza.
many Muslims are looking for an alternative to Islam. I do believe we're going to have a lot of revival, a lot of believers coming through. It's already happening today.
As for the Christians, Pastor William Devlin says many have remained in Gaza to help suffering Muslims.
The situation in Gaza is perilous. It's enormous. There are 1,000 Christians left in Gaza in a sea of 2.2 million Muslims. And these 1,000 Christians are now living, 500 in the Greek Orthodox Church and 500 in the Roman Catholic Church.
Devlin heads up the global charity Widows and Orphans. A frequent traveler to Gaza, he believes Christians and most Muslims there do not support Hamas.
Hamas is a culture of death. They are all about death. So we're grateful that the Christians are there giving life. And many of them could have left, but they say, look, this is our ancestral homeland. We've been here since antiquity, and we're not going to leave.
Fighting destroyed homes of both Christians and their Muslim neighbors. So the need for food, water, and medicine is widespread. Devlin is hoping the IDF will allow him to go in soon to deliver much-needed relief.
In the midst of their travail, the Lord Jesus is appearing to the Muslims there, and we pray that God would continue to reveal himself through his Son in dreams, in visions, and manifestations in order to bring all of Gaza to faith in Jesus Christ. Pray for many Muslims to come to faith in Jesus. That's their only hope.
A hope and love that Gaza's Christians know endures for eternity. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thank you, Gary. And still ahead, a wild winter festival sure to make you shiver. Finally tonight, you've probably heard of a polar plunge, people jumping into cold water for a thrilling split second. But now one group is taking it to the next level. Some 180 swimmers suited up in decorated caps for the Memphrey Magog Winter Swimming Festival in Vermont. But they hit the water for more than just a quick plunge. Instead, each swam 200 meters in a narrow pool cut from the ice. It is the 10th annual festival of its kind. And that's going to do it for us this evening. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.